for showing up and doing all that they do. The library is a wonderful resource for all of us. The major thing that I want to do, just for 2 seconds, is to try and get everybody here to read this book. In the early 80s, in another life of mine, I was very involved in the beginnings of the computer business, and I befriended a guy named John Doerr. John is a quiet, very smart, nice guy, and he sent me this book last June. And I think it's one of the most important books ever published. It's basically a book of recipes about how the planet can survive. And John is a guy that invested, the first investor in Google and Amazon, and he's got to be worth many billions of dollars now. And he spent a fair amount of it finding the expert in 25 different categories of need to save the planet. And I just want everyone to get a copy of this book, get it out of the library, and read it. It's basically a book of recipes. How much money, what's the timetable, who are the experts, and basically, do we have a chance? It's a very, very serious issue. So in this book, in the first half of it, there's a table of contents that talks about zero-out emissions. And number 1 is electrified transportation. Number 2 is decarbonize the grid. Number 3 is to fix food. Number 4 is to protect nature. Number 5 is to clean up industry. Number 6 is to remove carbon. What I know is that there's some people in this room that have been involved in number 4, protecting nature, for a very long time. And I know the Friends of Princeton Open Space was founded in 1969. Wendy's just told me she signed in, I think, in 1978, something like that. I moved here. You moved here. And the thing about John Doerr's book, on page 185, he says, "No tool is more powerful or accessible than civic involvement at the local level." That's what Princeton Future tries to do, is to get people involved and get them to show up and talk. And it looks to me as if most of the audience today is kind of the choir, and I don't know what everybody else is doing today, but maybe the room will fill up. I have asked one of our long-standing board members of Princeton Future, we're now 23 years old, and Catherine Kish, our moderator today, who used to be president of the Chamber of Commerce and here, and is now executive director, I guess, of Einstein's Alley, which is a group trying to get technology to come to this part of the world. Catherine is a dear friend and a board member of Princeton Future since the beginning, 23 years ago. So I'm going to turn this over to Catherine, and she's a much better moderator than I am. Thank you. Oh, I had one other thing. Sorry, keep coming, Catherine. We've been making books about these meetings, and there's one on hopes and dreams, one on the hopes and dreams of different organizations in town, one on areas of Princeton most susceptible to change, one on mobility and circulation, one on housing justice, which was the room was full on that subject, and then the last one on March 11th is on how we get around. And I should mention that this month, Governor Murphy has declared this Walk and Bicycle to School Month, which is terrific. Anyway, here's Catherine.
The reason I got this job is that I'm a little tougher with the timing than Sheldon is. He lets people go on longer, and I kind of call time. So bear with me on that. Good morning, everybody. So glad to see you, and so glad to meet many of you today that I've heard about. What we're going to do today is we're going to open our presentation with Cindy talking about open space. And I don't know, wave Cindy so that they can see where you are. All right, Cindy's going to be with us, and she's Cindy Taylor, and she's the open space manager for Princeton, New Jersey. She's our official this morning. And then we're going to have a group of speakers from wonderful, wonderful organizations here in town. So Patricia Shanley, Sophie Glovier, Stephen Hiltner, Jim Waltman, Wendy Mager, and Nancy Faherty are all going to talk, and we'll introduce each one of them. But the format for today is going to be, first Cindy's going to talk, and then we're going to have some time for questions directly to her material. Then we will have each one of the representatives of the other organizations come up and speak for a while, 5 minutes, maybe 6, but 5. And then we'll have a moment, if some of you have burning questions that you've just got to ask at that moment of that speaker, we've got 2 stanchion microphones, and we can always get another one. You'll be able to ask questions directly for just a few minutes. And then when we get finished with all of the presentations, we're going to have a general Q&A session. So as Sheldon said, this is a group that focuses on listening, and we want to give you all as much opportunity as you need to ask good questions and get the answers from our experts here today. So with that, I'm going to introduce Cindy Taylor. Cindy's a fascinating young woman. She's been in the field of conservation for about 10 years. She's been all over the country, the Poconos, Alabama, heaven knows where else, and Costa Rica, doing conservation work for all kinds of organizations. So we are so lucky to have her background and experience here with us in Princeton as manager of open space. So Cindy, why don't you come on up and we'll start.
I'm shorter. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. So I'm Cindy Taylor. I'm the open space manager for Princeton. Just a little background. This is a new position for the municipality. There was not an open space manager before. And I've been with Princeton for about 1.5 years now. I work under the direction of our deputy administrator, Deanna Stockton, who's floating around somewhere, hiding in the back. Who oversees infrastructure and operations. But the work that I do spans many departments. So I frequently collaborate with our engineers, our planners, our recreation department, Department of Public Works. So there's a lot of collaboration happening between staff at the municipality. But generally what I'm involved with is working in the planning stages of conserving land throughout the municipality, implementing projects on that land, and then some of the maintenance of that land as well. And generally my goal today is to show you what Princeton has in the way of parks and open space, talk about some of the projects that we have going on in those open spaces, and then kind of just a little bit of what we hope for the future. When I started at Princeton, again, about 1.5 years ago, I had met with a lot of our open space nonprofits kind of as a listening tour to hear what people have been doing in our open space, the history of those spaces, and then what they hope to see from the municipality in the future. And I was telling Catherine earlier, I never met with Princeton Future. So Ultimately, today, I'm actually really excited to just do a lot of listening after I get through this presentation and hear what other people are interested in and seeing in the future. So just to start, how do we define open space? This is from our ordinances, and I'm going to let everyone quietly read that to themselves because every time I try to read it out loud, I trip over it because it's very wordy. So I'll just give everyone a minute to read that. So when I read this, the couple of takeaways I have is that the term unimproved and natural openness is quite vague. It's hard to specifically define what that applies to, but a clear defining point in this is that the land is designated or reserved. So open space from our ordinance side does not necessarily mean any place in the municipality that has trees on it or is natural. It's land that has been designated or preserved as such. Which is kind of important as we look forward to what other land we want to designate as open space or how we want to take care of the land that's already been designated as open space. The state groups recreation and open space areas together, and for essentially the next couple of slides that I'll share, I'm not going to parse those two things apart. And many of our parks tend to be both recreation and open space. So Greenway Meadows is a great example of where we have active soccer fields right next to a natural meadow. Barbara Smoyer Park has baseball fields and then a passive side with picnic tables. We kind of use the term open space generally to talk about parks and open space in Princeton. So to start, the map on the screen is the same as the physical maps that are hanging on the walls. All of the colored polygons on this map represent areas that are deemed recreation and open space. The path data on this map that shows connectivity is very much a draft form of connectivity. So Sophie later will talk, and Rob later will talk about trails and hiking throughout Princeton. And in an effort to kind of inspire that conversation, Sophie and I threw this data on the map so we could kind of take a look at it, spark conversation. And if anyone sees something on that map that's related to trails and connectivity, you think, oh, this is an error, just write it on there or pull me aside and say, hey, let's fix this data here. So it's just the caveat that data for paths is very much in draft form right now. So Sophie and Rob will talk about that later, but what I'm focusing on is the colored polygons within this map. And this map represents data that I've been working on since I started at Princeton. The goal was to get all of our recreation and open space information in one place. So when I arrived, we kind of had, excuse me, we had lists of our parks. We had lists of properties that were protected by Green Acres. We had conservation easements in our deed books. And we were trying to pull all that information so we could look at it all in one place and analyze it all in one place. So in this map, the different colored polygons indicate different forms of ownership. And I think one thing I do want to point out is that all of those different colors really represent how much it takes an entire community to protect land and create open space. There's so many different partner organizations that do this. And for this map, what we decided to identify as recreation open space is something that fits one of the 4 points listed on the screen there. So first, any parcel that's designated as a municipal or state park is colored in something on this map. That doesn't necessarily mean that that area is protected in some way. It's just designated as a park. We also included lands that are restricted from development using tools such as a conservation easement, a deed restriction, or through stipulations of the subdivision. And just general terms, all of those mean a legal way to restrict the type of development on a property. The third is land that is protected by Green Acres regulations. Green Acres is a New Jersey state program that funds recreation and conservation needs. And the properties restricted by Green Acres must be solely used for recreation and open space. And then any changes to those properties, typically per Green Acres regulations, have to go through a very public process. And then the fourth point that we have here is any property that's owned by an open space nonprofit. So partners at DNR Greenway, Friends of Princeton Open Space, Ridgeview Conservancy, the Watershed Institute, and New Jersey Conservation Foundation. Anything that they own is also designated as open space. So just analyzing the numbers real quick here. We have about 3,200 acres designated as recreation open space. That's about 27% of Princeton. And then the ownership is breakdown is shown at the bottom of the screen. The municipality owns outright about 37% of that area, and about, it's too small and dark on my screen, about 41% is privately owned. The areas that are privately owned doesn't necessarily mean that's not open to the public. In fact, about 40% of privately owned open space does have public access. And just pointing out a few of the big ones here, the Institute for Advanced Study, this big brown area down here has public access trails, and it's protected through a conservation easement that's held by DNR Greenway and the municipality. This big brown property here is the Coventry Farm, the Wynette Farm that has their vineyard there, and they do allow public access through their property on the south end, and that's also protected by DNR Greenway with an easement. And then these other brown areas up here, a lot of them are often properties that are owned by a homeowners association that were protected through the planning board process. So kind of just showing how there's so many different ways that we protect land and methods to get there. So thinking about the tagline for today, hopes for climate resiliency, equitable access, and community well-being. I'm going to talk about things that the municipality is doing to address these points. Most of the work that I do falls into one of these three categories, which is conserving land, natural resource stewardship, and then improving access and use in these spaces. Just to, before I get too far into my own work, I wanted to note that there's lots the municipality does that doesn't cross my desk. We have stormwater regulations that are twice as strict as the state's regulations. We have a municipal arborist who plants about 200 trees a year to try to improve our urban forest canopy. We recently put in EV charging stations at Witherspoon Street. So this is just a very small drop in the bucket as far as what's going on. But as far as conserving land, so in the past year and a half, there's 2 parcels that have been preserved in Princeton. The first one is that big pink one on the northwest side of town. It's 153 acres off of Cherry Valley and Province Line Road, and it was the last and largest forested tract, or the largest of the last forested tracts in Princeton that had not yet been preserved. And that was through partnerships with nonprofits, and is now co-owned with a lot of the nonprofit partners that are here today. The second one is this little brown parcel right here, which closed a couple of months ago. That is a conservation and public access easement at the corner of Great Road and Cherry Valley Road, which will be held and enforced by Ridgeview Conservancy. This is an example of the public and private partnership where Ridgeview Conservancy put in years, Trish, I would think, years of negotiations and technical work and to get the property to have a conservation and public access easement. And then the municipality, using its open space funds, provided some of the funding to purchase that easement. And I don't believe trails are open on it yet, but they are coming. The second part of open space conservation is the very unsexy part of maintaining compliance with Green Acres regulations. Again, Green Acres is a state program that provides funding for us to buy all these open spaces. And to go through this quickly because it's dry, we have to maintain a list of all of our open space, which is the ROSI, Recreation Open Space Inventory. Every time we buy property, we have to do grant closeout. So even though we bought the 153 acres, there's still a lot of paperwork and encroachment issues to suss out. So the work is continuing. And then lastly, we need an open space and recreation plan in order to be eligible for Green Acres. So I think everyone here knows that we're going through the master plan process right now. And at the same time, concurrently, we are renewing the environmental resource inventory, which will help inform the open space and recreation plan portion of the master plan. Beyond conserving land, managing for diverse, healthy ecosystems to provide habitat and stormwater management and carbon sequestration is an important part of the municipality's resiliency. The municipality owns about 1,400 acres of recreation open space, so meticulous management is difficult, but we're moving forward with management on some of these parks, and we're also working very closely with our nonprofit partners. One of the things the municipality does is contract every year with the New Jersey Invasive Strike Team, which is a nonprofit that goes out into the towns and tries to eradicate newly emerging invasive species. These are invasive species that have not yet become widespread throughout the state, and the strike team goes out and tries to eradicate them so that they don't become a problem in the future. One of the climate action goals for the municipality is to increase meadows and no-mow lawns. The picture on the left is a pretty classic example describing why native plants are better than the turf grass lawns that we're used to seeing. In the middle of that diagram that's highlighted in yellow, you can see the lawn has very short roots, and whereas the native plants to the left and right of it have very long roots, which obviously indicate that those plants are more drought resistant, but also importantly, those roots sequester a lot of carbon. So it's also a huge role in carbon sequestration. And then of course, above the ground, those plants provide habitat and food for native animals. So as we start to think about increasing our meadows and no-mow areas in Princeton, I believe the first step is to make sure that we're properly stewarding the meadows that we do have. So Greenway Meadows is a great example of a beautiful meadow Princeton has. It's off Rosedale Road, and DNR Greenway's office is there. So we had a consulting company come out and just do an inventory for what we had at Greenway Meadows to help inform what we should manage first and how we should start to steward it. All of the colored polygons you see on the screen to the right indicate some sort of invasive species, which at this level looks very overwhelming, but when you break it down into which ones are the most important ones to start managing first, you can kind of take it in bite-sized pieces. We're never going to make this meadow so it has no invasive species. The goal is to make sure that it's on the right trajectory to have mostly native plants. So after doing this inventory, now we're working on a management plan, and we'll start greasing the wheels to make sure that we have a good plan in place for managing all of these meadows and no-mow areas. Oh, that got messed up a little bit. I'm sorry. But the last part that we have here, I'm sorry, the screen got moved, or the image got moved, but we are doing a Community Park North Forest Restoration Project. So some stewardship that we do is born of opportunity, and New Jersey DEP had a grant for natural climate solutions, and we applied in partnership with Friends of Princeton Open Space, and now we are planning to do a forest restoration project at Community Park North, which is, I apologize, this arrow's in the wrong place now, but if you know where the municipal buildings are, and Community Park South right here across over 206, right next to Mountain Lakes and north of Petronella Gardens is Community Park North. And if you've ever hiked at Mountain Lakes and found yourself in a forest full of white pine and Norway spruce, and suddenly you're in evergreens, that's Community Park North. So we're planning to do a forest restoration project there. We were granted over $500,000 in funding, which will improve the resiliency of the forest, increase carbon sequestration, and provide lots of education and volunteer opportunities within walking distance of downtown. Whew. As I noted before, the municipality owns about 1,400 acres. And so our partnerships with the nonprofits are super helpful and super important. So I just wanted to make sure I took a moment to go through and acknowledge the groups that are doing very meticulous on the ground work. The first being, we have a group of master gardeners who adopted the gardens at Barber Boggs Sigmund Park. They do a lot of maintenance there, they do plantings there, and they make sure they stay looking beautiful. The neighbors of Caldwell Park, which is a park that's kind of unknown and hidden because it's behind a bunch of houses, have installed a meadow there to replace some of the turf grass and care for it. The Neighbors of Geo Walk host volunteer events with Sustainable Princeton to do cleanups and introduce native species within that corridor. And they have a volunteer event today that starts at 1. So if you're interested in walking over there after this meeting, I'm sure they'll take you to help remove some things and put some plants in the ground. I've worked with a couple of students from the nonprofit Just Some Help who wanted to plant milkweed at Turning Basin Park. And then, of course, all of our long-established nonprofits that really take really good care of our open spaces. It's Friends of Rogers Refuge, Friends of Princeton Open Space, Friends of Herrontown Woods, DNR Greenway Land Trust, Ridgeview Conservancy, and the Marquand Park Foundation. So from the aspect of trying to improve access and use and community well-being, we're looking to create more public access wooded trails. The first project is these 2 brown parcels here on the north side of town. It's currently owned by a homeowners association, and the municipality has launched into an agreement where we will accept the donation of that land, so then we can make it public we can make it publicly accessible for everyone to hike and walk through there. There's a bunch of steps that lead up to this, to include a minor subdivision. Ridgeview Conservancy has built the trails there, so as soon as we can make it public, it's ready to go. But what's important about these types of spaces is that they're accessible from areas of high density housing. So that parcel of forest is accessible by sidewalk from Griggs Farm. So we're always looking for where the communities that don't have a backyard, that don't have, their own outdoor open space. And this is a great example of one that is walkable from that type of community. Similarly, on the other side, with the other arrow pointing to those kind of pink parcels, that's Mount Lucas Preserve. It's owned by Friends of Princeton Open Space, the municipality, and New Jersey Conservation Foundation. And we're in the beginning stages of planning to install trails there. The property's very, very wet, which means that if we're doing everything above board, we need to get DEP permits to put in those trails and boardwalks. So we've hired on a consultant to help walk us through that permitting process, but ultimately want to make trails that are accessible. Again, this is another one that is accessible by sidewalk from Reading Circle, so another high density housing community that will be able to get to open space by foot. And then, of course, we want to try to improve the trail maintenance for trails that we already have existing. Our nonprofits have done a miraculous job doing that up to this point, but I did just recently hire on a landscaping company that will go through 2 or 3 times a year some of our parks that don't have regular, robust volunteer groups to maintain them, just to make sure that the trails stay clear, the grass stays low. There's frequently a lot of stilt grass in our trails, which I think we say this every year, but the ticks are really bad this year. Every year we say that. So the goal is to really just make it safer for people to walk through and make people feel safer walking through. If the trails are better defined, they feel like they won't get lost. If they're not walking through grass, they won't pick up as many ticks. So just at a very basic level, trying to improve our trail maintenance. And then also with access and use, we want to support different types of uses of our open space. The municipality opened a dog park at Community Park South this year. I think it's been, people are really having a lot of fun over there. And concurrently, Community Park South is going through a redesign process, which is being managed by the Recreation Department, and it provides an opportunity to reimagine the space, listen to the public, see if we can use it more efficiently, or it can be more suited for what the public wants to use the land for. And then the other image on the left, which Steve is here, and I'm sure Steve's going to talk a lot more about this, a lot more eloquently than I will, but in 2020, the municipality entered into a lease agreement with the Friends of Herrontown Woods to allow them to lease a couple of the historic buildings around, well, the Veblen House itself and the historic buildings surrounding the Veblen House, with ultimately the goal to create a community center, education center, where people can come in the woods, learn, and then hike and be on the trails. So future goals are really just more accessibility, trying to connect all these open spaces so that they're walkable from downtown, making sure people in the former borough can reach a lot of these beautiful open space trails out on the outskirts of town. looking to our right-of-ways to see if we can connect open space that way, increasing our signage, website information, mapping, making sure people know that we have all these gems throughout Princeton and they know how to get there. And then last, of course, just increasing stewardship. We're at the very beginning stages of that on the municipal side. So as we go through the years and we preserve more land and spend less time preserving land, we can always devote more time to the stewardship of that land. And that's been a trend throughout, at the county level even. Their open space money used to be specifically for acquiring land. And I think in the last 2 years or so, they switched it that 25% of that open space funding goes specifically to stewardship of open space land. So that's kind of, I think, the process we'll see too. We're very heavy on land protection and we'll over time be able to spend more time doing stewardship. And that's it. Thanks.
We have some time now for questions directly for Cindy. Would you come up to the microphone since we're Zooming? I can bring it. Go. Okay. Oh, I can come up.
Hi, I'm Lynn Stein. I'm a resident in Riverside. I just wanted to thank you for an excellent, very informative presentation. In looking at the map, I'm just wondering if you could give us a sense of like the Mount Lucas parcel and where you were pointing to the northern place. What acreage or what are we talking about in size of? Do you have any idea?
Wendy, do you know how big Mount Lucas is off the top of your head?
Mount Lucas is 25 acres right now.
Thanks,
There is a small parcel that we're hoping to acquire in the future that could provide better access to it. But now it's 25 acres.
Thanks. 25 acres. Thank you, Wendy. Numbers don't stick in my head very well.
Other questions?
On those photographs that you had a minute ago, can you point out where those are? I recognize one of them, but the others, it's not clear where they actually are, and I think that would be fun to know.
What exactly do you want?
The picture that you had just before this had 4 or 5.
Oh, the intro photos?
Yes.
Sure. So,
Where are all these places?
left to right, I took that. Those were some of the flowers from a sweet gum tree that I found on the ground at the 153 acres in Princeton. The showy orchis in the next photo, I think I took that at Autumn Hills. Steve, have you seen showy orchis there? I can't remember.
Yeah, Herrontown Woods, Autumn Hill. Yeah.
It was either Herrontown Woods or Autumn Hill. The one in the middle is from a trail right next to the lake at Mountain Lakes. I was out working one morning and a walking group came through, and it was just, I only caught the tail end of them, but it was just really nice to be out and seeing people enjoy the space as a group on like a Wednesday morning. The tulip poplar seedling I took at a property we are hoping to conserve and acquire in the future when I was out with Sophie. And the third photo on the right, or I'm sorry, the last photo on the right is a picture of Rogers Refuge on a very rainy day.
Great. Other questions?
I just want to ask one other thing. On that map, can you point out what is, I've seen a lot of references to this emerald necklace, and I'm wondering where that is on that map.
I'm gonna let I'm gonna let one of our partners address that. But generally, it's the idea that we could create a ring of parks around Princeton, and we do have somebody who's going to speak about how all of those parks can be connected over time.
Thank you, Cindy. Tom Pinio. You talked mainly about the colored polygons, and I just would like to sort of put out a couple of things, or whether they should be part of the conversation. If so, how, and if not, sort of why not. So there are a couple of pieces. One is, of course, is the canal. It's kind of described as a bike path, but it's really much more than that. I think that's sort of, as we talk about connections, that's a central one. Sort of why the university isn't and the open space there with, and is it not open space, or kind of what's the distinction between, you know, again, the colored polygons and something like right in town, the university. And I think also then finally the sort of the very clean line of the municipality versus what folks like Sophie and Jim might talk about the watershed here, right? And so there are all of these other things right close to us that are maybe just outside that sharp dividing line of the municipality. I think of the really compelling case of intact agriculture very close to Princeton, and why that may or may not, or how that might factor into this conversation. You know, just so that's another key one for me.
So for the question about the university-owned land, the map is representing parcels that have been designated as recreation and open space, and that's ultimately the difference. And we can always we're always working to designate more land as open space. So there may be parcels, and I know people ask me all the time about the Butler tract here, and people ask me about the textile resource property here. Those are definitely possible future open space areas, but at this point, what the map represents is what we have already designated in some way. So it kind of helps inform what should we be looking at as still available for the future. And your second question was about, all the neighboring towns. Not included in this map, and I have to be honest, part of that's because I just didn't have much time to designate to making a map showing all of our neighbors that was nice and clean. But we've had multiple meetings with Montgomery Township to talk about connectivity between their properties and ours. We've actually started talking about a couple of parcels up here that would be helpful to acquire that would allow this high-density community up in Montgomery Township to be able to access Autumn Hill and connecting our open spaces that way. So those conversations are happening. I just didn't bring a map to represent.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than somebody saying, how come you haven't done 12,000?
Well, thanks for saying that.
I get it.
Thank you.
Sorry. That's not what I meant.
Hi, Cindy. Mike Timmons. I spent a lot of time on the canal path, and I was just curious what that land plays into this analysis and what the municipality does with it at all.
Well, it's state-owned parkland. And honestly, looking at this map right now, I feel like a large chunk of that slice is actually outside of the municipal bounds.
That's what I was thinking, too.
But
I'm just curious if there's any interaction with that.
Yeah, we're looking at it as to be Rob will talk again later about the connectivity in the Emerald Necklace, possible trail loop, and that does play a big factor. And when we think about how can someone navigate all around Princeton, using that canal path is obviously a very helpful option.
Other questions?
Oh, just one more quick one. The 153-acre woods that you mentioned, that's the newly acquired property in the upper left, is that right?
Yep.
And I see there's a nice guide that's here over here on the table that someone made, very beautiful.
Ridgeview Conservancy.
Oh, okay. Is that then open to the public? Can that be used, or is that still in development?
I'm glad you asked that. Yeah. There is a trail there. I've been telling people they may go there. The caveat is it does not have a kiosk. It does not have parking. But there is a trail that people can go and access it from Province Line Road. And to your point, Ridgeview Conservancy has a great map, and the kids will talk about this as well. The people here built this trail. So people can go, you can access it. It's just not as nice and tidy as I'd like it to be yet. Yet.
Let's go. Another question.
What's the town's annual budget for maintenance?
I don't know off the top of my head because it's in different pools for different departments. So some of that goes to the recreation department, some of it goes to what DPW does for open space. So it's not all in one group. So I can't answer that off the top of my head.
Well, again, thank you so much.
Wonderful. We're very excited. Excuse my throat lozenge. Are you guys all bothered by pollen? Yes. Anyway, we are so excited to have so many wonderful groups in the same room. Oftentimes, each of you does something individually, but to have you all here is a wonderful, wonderful benefit. What we're going to do now, going forward, is we're going to ask each one of the groups to have their representative come up and talk for a few minutes. And then we'll have a few minutes for burning questions for each group. And after all the groups have presented, we will then have a Q&A, a general Q&A, so you'll have lots of opportunity. You know, Sheldon keeps telling us that Princeton Future is all about listening and all about hearing your comments, and so that's what we want to focus on today, so you have plenty of time to ask questions. So we're lucky to have the Ridgeview Conservancy, and Friends of Herrontown Woods and the Watershed, and Friends of Princeton Open Space, the Greenway. All of these people are going to be talking today, so I'm very excited about this. I'd like to start with Trish. If you come up, please. And Trish is going to be talking about the work of the Ridgeview Conservancy.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for the organizers, for all of you for showing up, and for all of you in this room that have worked for decades and decades to create the green spaces in Princeton. We moved here from Indonesia because of you, and those who are not in the room also. So there we go. I'll be speaking with my colleagues, Kate Krell and Amlan Parida. They are Princeton's future. I thought we should hear from them too. They are youth stewards. They've created the trail of the map that you just saw, and they're working on these newly preserved areas to create trails. So they'll join with me. We'll be talking about the Emerald Necklace and try to explain it for that one question. I've worked in the Brazilian Amazon, Indonesia, and the United States on forestry research and education for 35 years, so my perspective mixes in a lot of different places, and I focus often on human health and forests. Okay, so basically with climate change and species extinction, scientists have agreed, this is remarkable, 190 countries have signed on to 30 by 30, which is protecting 30% of the Earth's land and waters by 2030. I'm on 2 global forest expert panels. One is the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. The other's on forest and human health. I can tell you that behind the scenes, scientists think it should be 50%. So 30 is what's politically possible right now, but it's really important for the Earth's health and our health to really keep moving. So what have we done in Princeton? When we got to Princeton and I looked at the open space map, I was like, wow, we almost have Olmsted's Emerald Necklace. You can see that all the work that you and others have done, the Institute Woods, the DNR Canal, Herrontown, Autumn Hill, a beautiful pendant in the middle of mountain lakes, and then there's a right-of-way on the other side. We could have an Emerald Necklace. And there's only certain, we can do it by, these champions have done it. If we link these, what's lacking here is we see there's no connections. Imagine if we link them on a string and we link them to downtown, how much we could leverage and magnify the benefits for everyone and not just those who are near the green space. So the idea is to use new trails, sidewalks being finished, little rights of way, there's easements all over the place, and really magnify what we have. The idea is smart growth downtown while protecting the critical green infrastructure so this library does not flood again. We don't want that, do we? So this exists all over our country, Houston, New York, Phoenix. I mean, we've got these rights of way and all of these marvelous trails. I ran the one from Bethesda, DC. 23,000 people a week walk that one. You've got cleaner air, you've got a higher quality of life, and you have higher property values. Everybody wants to be on a greenway. So these are amazing. We have a hero in the room here. His name is Rob Tangent. You'll hear from him lately when you talk to, all of you are heroes to me. But he'll be speaking. He has walked the Emerald Necklace. It's 17 miles. He walked it with his daughter Kylie, who's also a Ridgeview steward. She said it was the happiest day of her life. It was near Father's Day. I mean, wouldn't we want that to happen to others, kids too, who don't have that? So why stop at the LHT? Why don't we go for the LHPMR? The Lawrenceville, Hopewell, Princeton, Montgomery, Rocky Hill Trail. Now we're talking, right? So Rob has already figured out that we can do 60 miles in Princeton. We can do hundreds if we link to these other places, and it'd be fabulous. So the green legacy. This administration, I can't thank Bernie, all of you. These are really gems. So on the left is the 153-acre woods. It was going to be cut down. We came here from Indonesia and we thought the last 2 old growth forests were going to be cut down. It's like, oh my gosh, here we've been working in like the Amazon and Indonesia, and we found out that these were going to be cut down. You're kidding. Massive carbon storage, fabulous habitat for endangered species, indigenous and African American history. So I have to applaud all of you here, because all of this group created a consortium, and working together, you can walk that trail now. So that's great. We've got one more to get, and we'll get it with Steve, right? We'll get that one. So you've got to walk into it because it creates these living linkages for flora and fauna. It's amazing. It's a beautiful path that these kids made, which is really fabulous to see. Who else lives in there? So what you did by saving this, you saved the kitchens and the living rooms and the bedrooms of species that are rare. There's 1 million species at risk of extinction globally. We don't really want to lose ours, do we? So we've got the red-shouldered hawk and the barred owl. This is Erin Kim. Last week in Ridgeview Woods, she found a box turtle. This happens like every other year only. They used to be a common species. Now it's a species of special concern. That's last year in the 153 acres they found one. This is to be celebrated. That's why they're called the Ridgeview turtles. So let's keep making sure that there's corridors, because fragmentation is what leads to local extinction. Okay, what about me? How about you guys? What do these green spaces do for you? Well, I can tell you, being on this forest health expert panel, better than any doctor, okay? Your endocrine system, your nervous system, your cardiovascular and respiratory systems, they are all given a massive tonic and a boost. It's like a tune-up. You cannot get this in the doctor's office. They lower crime and aggression, and I think importantly here, they lower stress and anxiety. The poor kids in school and globally, this is a crisis. And so it's really important we have these green spaces, and they need to link to downtown so everybody can get there. Okay, now the best part, the stewards. These kids have been working for 9 years. About 300 students have gone through the program. They've worked on 225 acres of pulling out the invasive species, so you get less ticks because ticks stay in invasive species. They're now teaching in the schools to get the little kids up on board on this. And we want to scale up to revive YCC, the Youth Conservation Corps in New Jersey and elsewhere. This is a global problem. You know, the Earth, catastrophic climate change and species extinction. We have a global problem with teen mental health, and we need to put those two together to heal everyone. So I want to thank all of you, each of you, the consortium, the town of Princeton, it's engineering, it's Bernie, it's Cindy, it's Eve and Mia and Mark. It's everybody coming together, and each of these amazing groups we're working with. So I'll turn it over to Kate. Kate is right in here. She's in that picture, and she's going to tell you more about what they do.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kate, like Dr. Shanley said. I'm really, really honored to be here. I've been working with Ridgeview Conservancy since my sophomore year, so it's been 3 years now. And actually at PHS, you need a 50-hour community service requirement, but I think I passed that a while ago, but I still go back every Sunday for a lot of reasons. So what we do is we go into forests, me and a group of high schoolers, and we learn about all the different flora and fauna and different species there, and these are things that we never learn in school, and we help cut out invasive species. Invasive species are actually like the second biggest contributor to biodiversity extinction, so it's actually really important and really great that we get to learn to identify them and, you know, cut them out from our forests. And I think it's just super nice for me and for so many other high schoolers because, you know, we have so much stress, like, you know, through school and, like, especially with academics and everything, you know, and, you know, college applications with senior year. And the nature brings a sense of calm that you really can't get anywhere else. And it's certainly just a great distressor. And I think with that, it brings a desire to want to share that with everyone, which is why a lot of us are so passionate about the whole Emerald Necklace project. It's, you know, a way by connecting all of these different beautiful gems to give equal access so everyone can experience the true magic of forests and, you know, the amazing benefits that forests can have. So, you know, and I've already, experienced that by living at Griggs Farm. I can walk to like the 40 acres, like I think Cindy mentioned before. And so we really, really appreciate everyone who's donated land or easements or just have provided any support in any way, because this never would have happened without you, any of you. And, we also want to scale up our program, and we want to share the knowledge of the forest that we have by, expanding this possibly to different towns, including different high schoolers. And we've recently been able to go into elementary schools like Littlebrook and Riverside and teach about, ecology to them. And, all the elementary schoolers love it. I think when 80% of our forests globally have been either cut down or degraded, that's a huge number, and that definitely contributes to climate change because forests are one of our best defenses against climate change. And when we learn about this in school, there's kind of a disconnect because it feels like it's such a big issue and we don't really know how to make an impact. But by having programs like Ridgeview, where we're able to take local action to save our forests and to, restore them by cutting out invasive species, it gives us a sense of empowerment that we never really had before. And I know that's really helped me and so many other friends I have at Ridgeview, feel empowered to make a difference with climate change, and just, to make a really big difference in our community, to improve our community. Thank you.
Everyone's going to speak. Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amlan Parida. Thank you all for coming here today. It's such a privilege to speak in front of such luminous people who have helped support natural spaces in our town. Like I said, my name is Amlan Parida. I'm an undergraduate student at Rutgers University. I'm actually graduating tomorrow with a degree in cell biology. Neuroscience, cognitive science, and a minor in environmental studies. I've been a member and a leader at Ridgeview Conservancy for about 6 years now. And today I just wanted to speak a little bit about my experience being a part of this wonderful group and how it has impacted me and informed my decisions as I pursue a career in public health and medicine. So since most of our members are high school students, I want to begin by talking a little bit about what high school was like for me. So I moved to Princeton when I was a sophomore in high school from across the globe from India when I was 16 in the middle of sophomore year. So that was quite a challenge. As you can imagine, it was a challenge on my first day at Princeton High when I was a sophomore. It was my 4th day in America, and I had never been outside of India before. I had never talked to a person of another race before, which is commonplace here. But things were brand new, and I was jet lagged during my first day in high school. I was falling asleep in chemistry class, and it was like going to school on a different planet. And it was really when I came to Ridgeview Woods to work with this wonderful community that we have there that I finally felt that I could call Princeton home. So it has a special place in my heart. But the point I want to make here today is that you don't have to move halfway across the globe to feel like you're lost in high school. I think it's a common sentiment among high school students. And after talking to over 100 high school students at Ridgeview Woods, I've realized that everyone feels that way, like I did as a sophomore. And it is important to find a way to channel those emotions and to process them. And the woods can be an incredible way to do that. Because when you go outside, when you work outdoors, not only is it inherently therapeutic, but when you couple it with a sense of community, it builds an incredible support system that you can rely on. So when I went to college, I wanted to use everything I learned at Ridgeview Woods to help support other students at Rutgers who may feel misplaced. My research over the last 3 years in a neuroscience lab is focused on stress and anxiety. And I'm actually publishing a paper recently on the topic of how stress and anxiety affect motivated behavior. And after 3 years of research, I can confidently tell you that chronic stress is probably the biggest threat on the way to becoming a successful, driven college student. So it's very important that we weed out chronic stress as soon as we start to see symptoms of it. So I established a club called Nature RX with Rutgers Psychiatric Services, which I obviously got the idea implementing the philosophy of Ridgeview Woods in this club. And the idea is that Rutgers Psychiatric Services directs students to spend more time outdoors with our club as an alternative to therapy to alleviate the symptoms of anxiety and stress. So in our first year as a club, we have been able to help 15 students, and we hope to help many, many more as we go on. And the biggest challenge so far that we've faced is finding a way to make the woods in New Brunswick more accessible to every student on every campus, because the Rutgers campus is huge. And finding a meaningful way to link these natural spaces scattered all over New Brunswick has been a challenge. But we here in Princeton occupy a tremendously privileged position because we have a way to ensure equitable access to students of all ages in Princeton through the Emerald Necklace. And I just think it would be so advantageous, because in an age where students have a million reasons not to go outdoors, it is up to us to make sure that they have natural spaces within reach so that they can take advantage of this incredible resource like I have, like the Ridgeview Turtles do, and like your generations have for so many years. I urge you to support this endeavor whenever you can, and I thank you all for coming here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you to these wonderful young people, in addition to you for talking about this. And I must say, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and one of the proudest things that Cleveland, Ohio talks about is their Emerald Necklace, which is a ring of metropolitan parks. So we're on to something big here. It's very exciting. Okay. I think what we're going to do is move on next to Sophie Glovier, who's the author of Walk the Trails in and Around Princeton. Sophie?
Thank you very much. So we are so lucky, clearly, in Princeton with everything that we have. And I am going to posit that the Emerald Necklace really is already in place. We have some work to do on some minor linkages, but the fact that we can work together to activate it and invite people into it right now. So just as a reminder of all the wonderful open space we have. So I've been working to preserve and help people access open space in Princeton for over 25 years now. And I got involved first. I moved out of New York City and I got connected with DNR Greenway. And I started to be introduced to all the preserves here, and I started to walk on the trails. And I realized a couple of things. I realized that in some ways our open space is hidden in plain sight. How many people are driving past Mountain Lakes, which is like the donut hole in the middle of Princeton, and they have no idea, they've never been in. So that was one really big recognition that there is so much of it, but it's invisible in many ways from the car or everybody's daily life. The second, I would take my friends on walks because now that was what I was doing, and I would invite them and they would say, this is such a great walk. I would never come back here by myself. I'm scared of getting lost. So the first thing I would say is you really can't get too lost in Princeton, especially if you have your phone. But that was one of the reasons that I started to think about doing this book, Walk the Trails, which I did with photographer Bentley Dresner. And the next insight that led to this book was thinking, understanding, and talking to people. I don't know, going to take a walk in the woods. I think most of us in this room, that is really exciting. But for everybody, that may not be at their top 10 list of activities. But if there's a reason to go, something that you want to see, like Tent Rock, for example, which is in Woodfield, the Swinging Bridge that you can discover in the Institute Woods, Devil's Cave, which is in Mountain Lakes, especially when you're talking to children, now all of a sudden, let's go, and there's a reason to go. So those things were kind of the insights that led us to do this Walk the Trails in and around Princeton, which at one time was Labyrinth Books' bestseller, believe it or not. And some of the things that make me happiest is when people come up to me who grew up in Princeton and they say, I never knew this was here. I found it. Somebody will come up to me and say, I moved to Princeton, somebody gave me this book. And actually, I connected through the development of this program with Rob, who I'm going to invite up here in a minute, and I said, oh, have you seen my book? And he said, yes, that's how I found Woodfield Preserve, and it's such a beautiful place. So now I work at the Watershed Institute, and we have been doing a lot of work with trying to engage people in communities who haven't traditionally felt welcome in open spaces. And we've learned some lessons in doing that I wanted to share with you, because I think they're really important, with this idea that the open space is here, and we want everybody to be able to come access it. The first is that you really need to extend intentional, specific invitations, ideally through community groups that people feel affiliated with. I think we all feel as if this open space is here. We were thinking, well, the Watershed Institute is here. Why isn't everybody coming? And through work and talking with residents and building community partnerships, what we've realized is people really need an intentional invitation to be extended. And then once you get them there the first time, or they feel invited, then they will come back. The second thing is that wayfinding is very important. People, back to that feeling of being lost, it's even more important if entering into open space is something that you haven't done. Maybe with your parents, it's not something that you've learned with your family, so that's even a little more intimidating. So you need to know where you're going. And then we know through some research that's been done for the Alliance for Watershed Education, which is not rocket science, but sometimes you have to have research to prove these things. People are looking for fun activities to do with family and friends. So how can we make open space fun and invite people in that way, which I think lots of groups are already doing. Friends of Princeton Open Space, the Turtles, Ridgeview Conservancy, getting people out, Friends of Herrontown Woods. But maybe we all need to get together and be a little more intentional about which groups we're inviting, and et cetera. So this is a map, and Rob, if you want to come up, that Rob made, and it shows all of these are all the trails, basically. And I just want to point out, first of all, that this, it looks like a lot, and there's a lot of little pieces you can string together. So this was another insight in my book, that the route that you take matters, and if somebody gives you a route, that matters. So I think we need to think about that. And also that there are many places around town that even have these unofficial places that people use, maybe just the neighborhood knows. You were telling me about one the other day that is over Queenston Road, I think, and I know there's one along Lake Carnegie. So we have this map here today, and if you know of one of those, please draw that in. There are markers over there, and we can start to integrate them. And then I just want Rob to tell you, we have a lot to learn from the Lawrence Hopewell Trail, I think. And when we think about mapping, making things clear, wayfinding, and thinking about our open space in addition to the tonic effect, but something you can use to get from here to there. I need to get to here to there. Maybe I won't drive. Maybe I'll walk. So I think this is a great model. This is almost 19 miles. And Rob has found us a route that's even longer.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophie. Hi, everyone. Thank you. My name's Rob Tangent. I'm just going to be very quick to tell you my story. So I'm not an expert. I'm just a person who likes to go walking, right? I moved here about 10 years ago from Colorado. Before that, I was in Washington State, Alaska, Montana. So when I moved here, I didn't imagine Princeton would be a place where I would find nature. And, I was busy with work and raising family. But I lived in the Little Brook neighborhood, and I would go out to Herrontown Woods when I could, and I loved doing that. And then I discovered that adjacent to it was Autumn Hill. And then I got Sophie's book, and I found Woodfield. And like I said, you drive past Mountain Lakes. I'd never been to Mountain Lakes. And I looked at the map, sort of, the predecessor of one that Cindy showed, and I said, you know what? I came up independently of I never heard of the Emerald Necklace or anything. It was just, I was looking at the map, and I saw what looked like, to me, most of a circle. And I started to wonder, in 2020, I had my both hips replaced. And after I was recovering from that, I said, I want to get out and start walking again. So I started walking more. And I said, I wonder if I could get from point A to point B, Park 1 to Park 2. And over about a year of exploration, of going out on the ground and finding spots, and looking at the tax maps to see who owns stuff and everything, it's kind of nerdy. This is what I found. And as Trish mentioned a little bit ago, last Father's Day, get choked up. My daughter and I went and walked this. So It's actually 24 miles. And someone had questions earlier about, how's the canal fit in? So I'm not part of, an organization. I don't care about the borders, whose land it is or whatever. It's just, is it accessible or is it not, right? So we actually started up in Rocky Hill and the state land along the Millstone River, and then through Autumn Hill, Herrontown Woods, some land owned by New Jersey Conservation Authority, Hilltop Park, Fieldwood, the Ridgeview lands, the 153 acres that we just acquired, that was on it before it was okay, Woodfield, Mountain Lakes, the lands along Stony Brook, Greenway Meadows, Institute Woods, Rogers Reserve, the Canal Trail, and back all the way back up to Rocky Hill on the Canal Trail. I have since found other ways to go, so alternates that don't involve being on the Canal Trail for 6 miles, but it was a 24, we did it one day, we rode our bikes on the Canal Trail, but in total it was 24 miles. And like my daughter said, it was a pretty good day for her, so, and for me. So anyways, it's not all perfect, right? There was a few spots where we had to walk on the roads for a quarter mile here or there. And some of it's not open to the public per se. So, but anyway, so that's all I wanted to say. Happy to take questions or.
Thank you. Any burning questions? Okay. Thank you.
Publish it.
This is very, very interesting how we're having these wonderful additional speakers, so it's working out beautifully. Next, we are going to have Stephen Hiltner, Friends of Herrontown Woods.
I guess this is a pretty good map to have. I did not bring a PowerPoint, and if a picture's worth 1,000 words, I'm going to have to speak really quickly. I hope you understand what I say. So I'm with Friends of Herrontown Woods. I founded that group with Kurt and Sally Tazzlar back in 2013, so this is our 10th year. And before that, I came to Princeton in 2003, and I soon got involved with the Environmental Commission and also with Friends of Princeton Open Space, and I was on the board briefly before I was managed to talk them into hiring me to create a position as their first resource manager, I guess we called it. So that was very nice because my view was that if we're saving all this fantastic open space, it's just phenomenal if you've lived somewhere else and you don't have organizations like these that we have in town saving land. It's just, it's really a miracle. And so saving a lot of open space, but if the habitat isn't being managed to protect from invasive species, then you effectively have less functional open space for the wildlife. So, management of the space also expands the functional number of acreage. So that was one point that I guess I successfully made. So I worked for Friends of Princeton Open Space for about 6 years, and then in 2013, well, I discovered the Veblen House in Herrontown Woods around 2007, and tried to organize a group to work to save that. And 6 years later, finally the Tazzlars came along, and we had a core, and we formed the Friends of Herrontown Woods. Cleared all the trails. It's incredible to live in a town like Princeton, and yet there's pockets of neglect. Sophie talks about how people don't know about, they pass by all this open space without knowing about it. And Herrontown Woods was the first dedicated open space, not only in Princeton, but in Mercer County. So it really was the beginning, and we have Oswald and Elizabeth Veblen to thank for that. He was a great mathematician. Without Oswald Veblen, we would not have the Institute for Advanced Study. We would not have Old Fine Hall on the campus. There's so many things. And we would not have Herrontown Woods. We would not have the Institute Woods, because he was the main advocate for bringing all those parcels together 600 or 700 acres that eventually became the Institute Woods. So they really were the beginning of the founders of open space preservation in Princeton. And back in 2013, after Hurricane Sally, or Sally?
Whatever.
It sounds like a song. Like,
Sandy.
yeah, Sandy, thank you. But so that swept through in 2012, and Herrontown Woods was basically impenetrable, and Autumn Hills Reservation as well. So we went after clearing the trails. It was like being on the frontier. And then in 2000, so that group got together originally to reopen Herrontown Woods, essentially. And but we always wanted to preserve the buildings as well, because if you think about it, Herrontown Woods is up in the northeastern corner of Princeton, and if you're up there a lot, you start thinking about Princeton differently. You start seeing that all the buildings that really complement open space in Western Princeton, you know, Mountain Lakes House, fantastic, and the Johnson Education Center, Updike Farm, the historical folks out there, Clark House, all those are pretty much on the western side of Princeton. And what does the eastern side of Princeton have? Well, not really anything other than Veblen House and Veblen Cottage. And we really had to fight to save those from demolition. And they're, I think they're very important for bringing people together and getting people out in the woods, because, and we also have the Botanical Art Garden out there, which is a merging of nature and culture, and whimsy, and also 150 native species of plants, many of which are labeled. So it's a great way to learn about plants, to come to Herrontown Woods in the Botanical Art Garden. And then we have cafes. Once we start serving coffee, people start taking us seriously. So food, somebody mentioned food. That's important. And it's like getting people out in nature. You have all these people in this Botanical Art Garden, and we can talk about plants because they're right there, you know. And plus, people are enjoying themselves. They're meeting new people. It's a way of, you know. And then we have the work days where we, you know, we're pulling the invasive species. Maintenance is love, basically. I've realized, and so I also do a little work at Princeton High School. Started the Eco Lab there. We're now trying to restore it after a certain trauma a year ago. So that's a very important thing for kids to learn about nature, to have habitat right around the schools, and that's a big thing that's happening now too. So thank you, and I guess you can all search for Herrontown Woods, head out Snowden Lane, see what happens. Thank you. Oh, sorry. I have one other thing to say, that the Emerald Necklace is, I mean, Herrontown Woods is preserved, but you know, if we don't preserve the rest of the land for the Emerald Necklace, a lot of other places will be degraded, like Herrontown Woods. You'll have a lot of traffic going down Herrontown Road. So it's really important, even for preserved land, to have this other land preserved. So thanks to all the amazing people working on that.
Sheldon just informed me that I've been talking into a microphone that doesn't work, so I thought I'd come up here for a minute. This is very exciting and interesting. You know, and I had a revelation yesterday when I realized that there's a lot of traffic coming down my road that didn't used to come down. And I went, what's happening? It was a mystery to me, and I realized Google. Google has changed our lives, and it's changed where we drive to. And so we need to think about where this extra traffic is coming from as we think about protecting special spaces. So be aware of that. Don't know if there's any way to stop Google from sending cars down your road to get to somewhere. Next, we're going to have, were there any burning questions for Stephen? Okay. Next, we're going to have Jim Waltman talk on behalf of the Watershed. Jim?
Put that together.
Okay. Well, it's so great to be with all of you this morning. How are we doing? We're about halfway through the program, maybe?
We're good.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about what we do at the Watershed, and that's mostly about water. Before I do that, I just want to thank everybody in the room. I know this has been done before, but as someone who grew up in Princeton, the open spaces then preserved and some not then preserved were a very important part of my growing up. And I've said this to you in an email, Wendy, I want to say it publicly, that my parents both lived into their 90s. About the last 15 to 20 years was at Stonebridge, but most of it was near what is now Mountain Lake Reserve. And that's where they learned to do daily walks. And they took that daily walking habit up to Stonebridge, and I'm convinced that's why they lived such long and healthy lives. So all of the people in this room that preserve that particular place, I personally owe a lot to you. But let's talk a little bit about the Watershed. So this is our mission statement, very simple. We work to keep water clean, safe, and healthy, and we're a nonprofit, like some of the others you've heard from already today. So thank you for your support. To those who support us, if you haven't yet, there's still time. Okay, the Watershed deploys 4 basic strategies. These are increasingly integrated, but land conservation, environmental advocacy, watershed science, and education. These pull together, and they, in various different ways, actually are often deployed towards preserving open space. You may often see us at planning board meetings, or if you're lucky, you don't go to planning board meetings, but feel good that someone does to fight against the wrong things in the wrong places at the wrong times. And I'm very proud of the work that we've done over the years. We're not a land trust. We contribute to land preservation, but ensuring that land is available to be preserved is the first step in ensuring we don't build the wrong things in the wrong places. This is our beautiful center. This is the Watershed Center. We're over in Hopewell. We're very proud it's a LEED Platinum facility, which means it's very green. It has a lot of strategies to conserve water and energy. And it's open to the public 7 days a week. If you haven't come out, please do. We've got some neat exhibits. And the building, of course, is located on the 950-acre Watershed Reserve. There you go, about 8 miles west of here. And this is one of the newer features, this beautiful new 7/10 of a mile fully ADA compliant boardwalk. So this is changing a lot of people's lives, I think. We're seeing more and more traffic from people that we wouldn't otherwise see hiking trails. It's named after this wonderful species. This is the shagbark hickory. We have quite a few of those, and you'll see those on the boardwalk. But let's talk about water just briefly here and climate change. So one of the manifestations of climate change that we worry the most about is the impacts on precipitation. This is a slide from a few years ago, created by another wonderful nonprofit in the area, Climate Central, but depicting data between, it's about a 60-year run. What this shows is the amount of water that's landing in the most intense storms. So in the Northeast, the amount of water coming in the top 1% of storms went up 55% just over 60 years. And the trend line is just continuing that direction. So hold that thought. The other thing we know is that land use change also is complicating and having quite an impact on the water cycle as we've learned it, and flooding. So a normal or a natural watershed, about 50% of the water that drops out of the sky is going to infiltrate. It's going to percolate down into the soil. Only about 10% of that will run off. And as we add impervious surfaces, roadways, buildings, parking lots, etc., you'll see more and more of the water is going to run off, less and less is going to infiltrate. That's because of a couple things. The obvious, blacktop, water doesn't go through it, it flies off the surface, but also the loss of plants and trees. Trees do this wonderful process of evapotranspiration. They pull the water up through the roots, up the trunk, out through the leaves into the atmosphere. They also just physically block the rain, and then the rain evaporates off those leaves. It's one of these processes that we take for granted, but it has a profound impact on the water cycle And for those of us who live in urban or more suburban areas, flooding, right? So these are very important, and unfortunately the trend lines in both climate and land use are heading towards more flooding. A quick bit on hydrology. If you didn't know it, the Millstone River is Princeton's river, and it's one of those funny rivers that flows from the south to the north. Okay, admit it. How many of you didn't know that? Okay, fair enough. Okay, so we taught you something, right? So why is this important? Well, that's why it's important. So if you may have heard of the town of Manville. It's to our north. It is downstream from Princeton. It receives floodwaters from Princeton and 23 other towns on the Millstone and about 50 towns on the Raritan River. And there's a reason. When the President of the United States goes to a town after an emergency, he's going to the town with, I didn't say that right. Oh well, punchline. Joe Biden went to Manville because that was where the flooding from Hurricane Ida was the absolute worst. Okay, that's what it looks like. Manville is very much a overburdened community. The median household income is less than a third of what Princeton's is. Educational attainment, all these things. And unfortunately, it's one of the most frequently hammered towns in the state by flooding. So Manville's problem is related to what we do in Princeton and all these other towns. Couple more quick slides. Healthy forests equal healthy water. I talked about evapotranspiration and the blocking of water by the leaves. The forest soils also help cleanse the water. This is another hidden, free, incredibly important and valuable service that the natural environment is providing for us. So when we're cutting down forests, when we're losing these incredible ecosystems, we're harming ourselves. We're polluting our water. We're creating flooding. These forests also hold the water. So, you know, what's this guy talking about? Flooding forests. We're practically in a drought. Well, the water will be held by the forest soils and gradually released into a stream instead of having it all gone, essentially. So that forest is going to act as a natural sponge as well. The Watershed Institute is part of a big consortium of groups that was led by the Nature Conservancy, Rowan University, and New Jersey Conservation Foundation. They put together this thing called the New Jersey Conservation Blueprint. You can find this online. It's very simple. One of the things they looked at was the areas across the state that were providing really important services for our water. So areas that are important for groundwater recharge or that hold back floodwaters, areas that have wetlands and so forth. So that's a map of Princeton, pretty much. So you can see the high value, moderately high, and so forth. And generally speaking, there's this band across the north side of town that this blueprint has identified as most important for water resources. And it pretty much overlaps this area we call the Princeton Ridge on the north end of town. I found this from the early 2000s, a statement that the Watershed Institute made in one forum before the planning board. We were suggesting the land should be preserved. Unfortunately, that piece that was the so-called Ricciardi tract. But this is an incredible natural asset. Even if you don't care about flooding and water and what you're drinking, which I hope you do, it's just an incredibly natural area with a beauty and wildlife and that kind of psychic and very real health values that it provides. And the town has known this for a long time. This is from the 1996 Princeton Community Master Plan. It identified real importance of protecting environmentally sensitive areas, including, it calls out the Princeton Ridge as the very first place. The 2017 reexamination report said the same thing, as did the 2007, as did the 2001. So this has been a common theme. You've seen this map quite a few times, but the one on the left I just found, I don't know if this is the most recent. I'm sure Cindy's still in there in the room.
From 2011.
2011, exactly. So what's encouraging about looking at that is the progress the town has made. So go town and go nonprofits and all of you, the wonderful 153-acre piece on the west of town, but there's a lot of little places that have been preserved as well. And then I just highlight the piece in red, this 90-acre piece that's absolutely critical to also preserve. And I'm hopeful we can together make that happen as well.
Jim, you're out of time.
That's it.
That's it.
Actually, Jim used his question time. So we're going to go right on.
It's hard to make a 10-minute slide deck and turn it into a 5-minute slide.
It was nice. It was very nice. Wendy Nigger is going to speak on the Friends of Open Space Foundation. Kim is going to help me with visuals.
So you should just shift.
Yes, you're there.
Okay. All right, this is really my number 2 choice. So, there we go. Yeah. Thank you, Kim. Before you start the clock, Catherine, I have been asked by Deanna Stockton to put in a plug for an event that's happening later today. It's the unveiling of a plaque honoring our longtime board member, Helmut Schwab, for whom the Stony Brook Footbridge is named, and that is one of the important connections, largely driven by Helmut, of open space in Princeton, and it crosses the Stony Brook near Hun School. So I hope if you don't know about it, you can look on the municipal website or ask me and come. It's 3 o'clock. Okay, now.
Where?
So you want to park at the Hun School near the athletic fields, and then you'll be able to figure out how to get there from there. Just walk along the edge of the athletic fields, down the hill, and to the footbridge. This first slide shows all the pieces of open space that Friends of Open Space has been involved with since its founding in 1969. And you've heard many of them mentioned today. We're really proud of our record in doing this. Most of this is wooded passive open space, but there are exceptions like Turning Basin Park, which has a picnic pavilion and a canoe rental facility. And some of the others have, as was mentioned, open meadows and playing fields. So it's a mix. Some of these, Friends of Open Space was the only nonprofit that was involved. For example, the first 4 you see listed there, and that includes the Mountain Lakes Preserve as well, which is where we are headquartered, and we preserve that with the Township of Princeton. Over these many years, particularly since 1980, we've been able to contribute something approaching $10 million in funding, which includes grants from various governmental entities and private foundations, private donations that we've raised, and money from renting out the Mountain Lakes house. The next slide, let's see. No, the previous slide. So how do we pay for this open space? As this slide shows you, we're fortunate that in the early 1960s, the state set up the Green Acres program, which provides up to 50% of the certified fair market value of a property as a matching grant. Mercer County also has a grant program that will provide an additional 40% up to a cap of $1.6 million. We have in the municipality an open space tax. If anybody ever says to you, oh, we shouldn't spend this money on open space because we're taking it away from some other worthy cause, don't believe them. Our voters put into place an open space tax, and it's that money plus this public money plus what all the wonderful nonprofits you've heard from can raise that pays for our open space. The Mercer County open space tax is 3 cents on every $100 of assessed value, and the Princeton municipal open space tax is 1.7 cents per $100 of assessed value. And for the typical, the average Princeton property tax bill, that represents in 2022 $253 to the county and $144 to the municipality. And the municipal open space currently brings in about $1.23 million a year. I know there was a question earlier about how that money is divided. And in my experience, and Scott Sillers, who's here, is an expert on this, that varies quite a bit over time. Last year, about $425,000 of open space money was spent on principal and interest on bonds and interest on notes that were previously issued in order to buy all this wonderful land. The balance was about $944 million, and it was spent on costs such as employee salaries and benefits and equipment and supplies, identified with maintaining both our passive open space and our recreation facilities. But it remains the case that most of the ecological maintenance and trail maintenance of our passive open space is done by nonprofits like the groups that are here. And that's what we found back in 2015 when I chaired something called the Passive Open Space Advisory Committee. That committee was constituted following a period when proposals to preserve open space were not infrequently met by concerns about how can we possibly think of buying more land when we're not properly maintaining what we already have. And one of our strongest and best recommendations to come out of that committee was we have really got to hire an open space manager. We have got to have somebody whose focus is on managing and stewarding our open space. And God heard us, and we got Cindy Taylor a few years later. So thank you, Cindy. You just can't overestimate the value of having somebody in that position. The model of public-private partnership for the stewardship of open space is, I'm sure, going to continue, not just because it's been so effective, but also because of new funding opportunities. Could you show the, oh, I'm supposed to do this. Yeah. Oops, I pressed it. We want to see the open space area map. Yeah, that's okay. I would be doing the same thing, so I'm not going to criticize Kim. No, not that one. Okay, let's see. Yeah, there we go. Now, I just wanted to show you this nice map of the Mountain Lakes open space area. I'm pretty sure everybody here has been there, but as I said, that's where we're headquartered. We adopted about 140 acres of this many years ago, and we hold the conservation easements on it. And it sits at the center of over 400 acres of preserved open space and preserved farmland, which you see in the light brown color. That's Coventry Farm. There's a wonderful trail system, which is illustrated here. It's about 9 miles, 8.5 or 9 miles of trails. And during our early history, most of Friends of Open Space's work was oriented towards maintaining trails and building trails in this area, with some smaller ecological restoration projects, some of which Steve Hiltner engineered. But the year 2016 was a turning point because in that year, legislation was passed that allows the state Green Acres program to give open space stewardship grants to nonprofit organizations. And in the first funding round, we applied for and received a $50,000 grant for an 18-acre forest restoration project on the west side of the lake. So you can see that project area in green on this map. You can see the deer exclusion fence that was built around about half of that land. And that project is complete in some sense, but having spent now approaching $200,000 on it, the maintenance continues. So we keep going back, we replace plants if they die, we re-attack the invasive species, which were removed in large quantities as part of this project. It keeps on keeping on. Community volunteers are essential to our stewardship projects. They are wonderful people. In 2022, we logged over 1,000 volunteer hours. As of mid-April this year, we had logged another 500, but that was before 115 people turned up to work on Earth Day and more on Arbor Day and other recent stewardship days. So I'm sure we're already over 1,000 hours.
Wendy, please wrap.
Okay. Let's see. I just want to highlight our current project, which is outlined in red here, and that is the riparian restoration project. As you see, it's along the edges of Mountain Lake, also designated here as Palmer Lake, and along the streams that run through the preserve. So we will be continuing our reliance on volunteers for that project to clear about 15 acres of invasive species, but we'll also be contracting for some of that. And then you did hear from Cindy about how we collaborated with the municipality on a natural climate solutions grant recently. And the exciting thing about combining these projects and the Natural Climate Solutions Grant is it's creating over about 80 acres of contiguous open space that has been ecologically restored, so it truly is supportive of the birds and the bees and the bugs and the salamanders, and really beautiful for all of you to enjoy. So I hope I've convinced you that the resources are available for high-level stewardship of our preserved open space, and especially if we collaborate. If you work for a corporation that gives grants for environmental projects or encourages its employees to volunteer, please get in touch with us. And because volunteers are so critical to our efforts, I hope you'll consider being one. Thank you very much.
Wendy, quick question. The archaeologically sensitive areas highlighted on the slide, where you're not encroaching, what are those about?
We actually have to get permission from the state policy and historical preservation for all of these projects because the whole of Mountain Lake Preserve, 76 acres, is the state federally listed historic site. They gave us permission for the forest operation. When we asked them about the red outline riparian restoration, they said
When we asked the State Historic Preservation Office about the riparian restoration project, they said, please do not plant trees or shrubs in these areas that are shown in the sort of yellow-orange here, because those contain relics of the operation of the Princeton Ice Company, which existed at Mountain Lakes Preserve. And for example, on the right hand, those there were where some buildings were where ice was stored before it was loaded in horse-drawn wagons and driven around the Princeton community. So we're going to be careful and not plant any of the stuff there.
Thank you.
And next we have Nancy Faherty from the DNR Greenway Trust. You okay? All right. Nancy, take it away.
Thank you. It's good to go last because most of what I was going to say has been said. And I'm here today. My name is Nancy Faherty. I'm representing Linda Mead, who is the president and CEO of DNR Greenway, and Tina Notas, our director of land stewardship. If Linda was here, she would be pointing to many people in the room that she has worked with closely. And she would say that all the projects that we are talking about today couldn't happen in a vacuum. It was really people coming together and different organizations coming together to make them happen, and everyone brought a different level of expertise. If Tina was here, she would say, we really need to get those invasive species removed, and it's really hard to advocate for that. But neither one of them are here. Nancy Faherty is here, so I would like to say that I enjoyed listening to all of you today, and I would like to leave you with a takeaway. And the takeaway is if you go to this website, you'll read a lot of what's happening in Princeton and beyond. DNR Greenway has preserved more than 22,000 acres of land in central New Jersey since 1989. And they currently, the organization currently maintains 44 miles of trails, not an easy feat. And those 22,000 acres were done with many of the organizations in this room. But it's Mother's Day tomorrow, so we're going to continue what we learned here and have conversations around our kitchens and kitchen islands and dining room tables with grandmothers and mothers and daughters and sisters and the next generations. And I'd like for you to, before you have those conversations, download a free app called Travel Stories GPS. And if you download the free app and put your location in, you will get audio tours for free of the healing trails at Greenway Meadows, St. Michael's Farm Preserve Children's Trails, and most importantly for tomorrow, Women in Conservation. So Women in Conservation is one of the most recent ones. I had the pleasure of knowing very intimately former Princeton Mayor Phyllis Marchand. And Phyllis Marchand did so much in her 13 years of mayor, which didn't span consecutively. But when I read her obituary in the New York Times, it led with a paragraph about how she had deer exterminated. And boy, as a woman, and as a woman who never will reach the heights that Mayor Marchand did, I was taken aback because it was clearly, even with the New York Times, a lack of understanding of what deer management is and why it needs to be done, what invasive species removal is and why it needs to be done, and the biodiversity that all of you in this room understand. As a mom, I'm going to be talking with my children tomorrow who are 33 and 27 years old, and they tell me that their anxiety is related to two things. One, the threats to our democracy and the fact that rooms like this aren't getting filled up with burning questions. And number two, climate change. So when the pandemic came, DNR Greenway, with the leadership of Linda Mead and the board of directors, decided to do open spaces, open emails. And we sent emails maybe too often, but maybe not often enough to tell people how to access the trails. And Margie Harper, who was one of our longtime donors from Constitution Hill, I said to Margie, what do I do? You know, the Final Four is canceled. I've canceled my travel. I don't know what to tell my kids. What is social distancing? Do I pack up my office for 2 weeks or 2 years? And Margie said, like a mother, stay the course. And she said, open space is going to be a healer. Now, I took care of my own mother before her demise, and she was blind. And I took her to Greenway Meadows because you could push a wheelchair. And I listened to the stories on this Travel Stories tour of resilience perseverance, and patience. And sometimes it helped me, sometimes it helped my mother. I hope it helps my children. And I hope tomorrow we take what we learned from this room today, not just in Princeton, not just in our backyard, not just along the Emerald Necklace or our greenways and waterways, but how we really need to take nature and nurture and understand the balance. And I hope someday Phyllis Marchand's obituary in the New York Times could be rewritten to talk about how she brought everybody together. And it wasn't always a popular thing to do, and she always wasn't well liked. But one night she called me at 11:30 at night when she was ill, and she said, "I just pocket dialed you." And I said, "That's okay, let's talk." And she said, "I don't know, I just can't sleep." And I said, "Well, you know, I'm getting ready to go to Palm Springs, and I learned about bougainvillea because it's going to be all around, and tell me about it." And she knew about it. And she said, "Let me tell you about the different colors, but the fuchsia color is going to be the most vibrant. And let me tell you about how it grows in the middle of the desert in Palm Springs. And let me tell you how Mother Nature is stronger than we'll ever be." So I will close by saying tomorrow is Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to everybody who has nurtured a child or a creature. And please share what you learned from Cindy and all of these nonprofits around your living rooms and tables tomorrow, because it's very important. Thank you.
Wonderful message to close our presentations on. Inspirational message. Thank you. And now we have some time for questions. So let us begin. We will take the next. Let's see. It's now about 11:10, so we'll take the next 15 minutes for questions. Yes, we're going to bring the panelists up. Oh. Regular mic. Okay. Take the mics. Here we go. On mic. I can't even know. I can share. Press the button and it'll be green. All right. Okay, everybody, all the speakers have a mic? No. Let's see if I can. I'll handle it, please. And Patricia, I'll get you guys another mic. We'll share. Okay, all of our stars have a mic. Great. All right, questions. And hopefully this center microphone does work. It does work, you just have to speak into it.
So I can also run a mic if anyone would like.
So who has questions?
Did everyone? Oh, no. Thanks.
Here's our question lady in the back.
May I ask one question? Then I'm sorry. It's been very, very interesting, and I have to go pick up my herbs at the Herb Society before 12. But I guess one question I do have is, so much of our land is in private hands and homeowner hands and resident hands, and I read a lot about all the education, you know, native plants, choosing native plants, not choosing. I mean, there's a lot of material out there, but I wonder if there's any organization that works with stewarding homeowners in a way. Like, you know, I sometimes think, I live in the Riverside neighborhood or the Littlebrook neighborhood, if you could get contiguous properties to do things that are in private hands. We focus a lot on open space, and I do see a lot of individual educational programs all the time. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of nurseries in the area that sell things that on many lists are invasive. Mm-hmm. I've puzzled over it myself because actually if you look at the Rutgers educational materials, there's conflicting materials about what's invasive, what's not invasive, what you know, there's a lot of stuff out there, but I do feel like as a community, we could probably make progress by trying to educate the entire private homeowner community in an area to all embrace sort of one thing to the extent you could get buy-in. And I'm just wondering if any of our organizations in the town do that.
Yes. Everyone's raising their hand.
Jim, you want to start?
Great.
Is it green?
Okay.
You're talking. It's not.
I'm talking.
I don't know
Your
that.
turn.
Okay, we'll do this. Okay, thanks for the question. So the Watershed Institute has a program called River Friendly, and we work with homeowners. We also work with businesses, golf courses, schools. And the point is that, everybody's on their own journey. And I think what we need to do is try to help people along that journey. So we have a dedicated staff person that will work with you to find ways to green up. A lot of it's focused on water. So what to do with the property to make sure you're not part of the problem and you're restorative. But the native species thing is a real key thing. So it's a great question.
Good. Wendy?
This is on now.
Okay.
Whoops.
Yeah, I wanted to say that, part of the reason that we're so happy to have volunteers come and work at Mountain Lakes Preserve is that in the course of removing invasive species and planting native ones, we can offer them information and choices of plants they could be using on their own property in lieu of these bad ones Jim was describing that still get sold at nurseries, and to know what's an invasive species. But I want to urge everybody here to contact your legislators and support, as Friends of Open Space just has, the legislation now pending to regulate the sale of invasive species in New Jersey, which is one of like 5 states in the country that don't do that. It would require a permit from the Department of Agriculture, advised by an invasive species council, to allow the sale of these things that invade our woods and outcompete the plants we want.
I just wanted to do a plug for DNR Greenway has a native plant sale.
Yes.
And
Actually, the native plant sales have grown like 5 times in the last couple of years. And I think what we give out more of than plants is advice. And we've actually been bringing corporate teams in to help us prepare and teach them as well as we're unloading the trucks. But we do 2, one in the spring and one in the fall. We probably could do 20. But we're trying our best to keep growing it and to keep teaching the community. And people are receptive, and they're coming from all over. So that's the good news. I have a river-friendly watershed teardrop in my backyard. I live along the river in Lambertville in houses that really should have never been built. But when I moved in, they used to have landscapers just come with weed whackers and like clear the whole riverbank. And I said to them, why do you do that? And they said, so that it's clean. So we all need to keep learning.
Steve, if I could I just want to give Eve a chance, because when Mel was asking her question, I was thinking it's a pity we don't have anyone from Sustainable Princeton here, but we do.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Eve Colson. I'm the chair of the board of Sustainable Princeton. I've been involved for, 8 or 9 years. And a couple of years ago, we began to focus directly on that issue with a project we call Changing the Landscape. And it had to do, and we were learning kind of how to proceed because we wanted to educate and bring awareness to homeowners at the same time as with landscapers, and we didn't want to put them out of business. And it's kind of a vicious cycle, or it's interrelated. So I would encourage you to take a look at our website, and I'm happy to talk to anybody further about some of the things that we've been thinking about and doing.
I just wanted to say that we've done some neat collaborations with Sustainable Princeton, because Sustainable Princeton has such a great program called the Star Neighborhood Program, where a group of neighbors can get together and then you can get a little bit of funding to do something. And so we've collaborated on things, you can buy plants, and we've been able to come in and advise neighborhoods that have had flooding issues. So there's a lot of neat collaborations going on in this space.
I meant to talk about the star. I meant to mention the star neighborhoods, but I hadn't practiced my speech enough. So I'm glad you remembered that.
Yeah, flooding is a neighborhood problem. It's not an individual.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. We have a young person here with a comment.
Yeah, hi. For Ridgeview Conservancy, what we've
kind of been doing a couple things. First, going into elementary schools, like I think I mentioned for a second, but we're going into elementary schools to teach the kids how to identify plants and like the difference between native and invasive species. And the overall goal of that is to empower them to transform their school courtyards and everything to get rid of the invasive species. Because even at Princeton High School, we have Japanese barberry like right in the front, and you know, being able to kind of get like into our schools and provide like change, and you know, informing students about, you know, how to make that change is, I think, pretty important. And also, Ridgeview Conservancy is actually collaborating with New Jersey Invasive Species Strike Team to bring to Princeton a community stewardship field workshop that is open to the public. You just have to register. It's on June 10th from 2 to 4 at Ridgeview Woods. And it will, and everyone who comes will learn how to identify invasive species through like a pretty nice like workshop, and learn all about, you know, Ridgeview Woods, its history and everything. So if you're interested, we have flyers, and it's gonna be really great. So yeah, thanks.
Excellent. Other comments, Steve?
Is this on?
Yes.
It is? Oh, okay. Well, I worked a lot over like the last 15 years trying to get people to change the way they take care of their yards, and I realized that people are very disengaged from their yards. They basically are farmers who don't know anything about plants because they're surrounded by land that they oversee, but they know nothing about it, and they just have professionals come in and push all the leaves out in the street and so forth, and that's about it. So what I finally realized is one thing I could do that's useful is create this, you know, this botanical garden at Herrontown Woods where people can come and see how you can slow the water down, how you can play with the water that moves through your landscape and actually make it useful to, you know, take care of plants and make things thrive, and learn about the plants that way. And rather than trying to change people, people want nature to be very simple. Nature is very complex. They're baffled by it, and if you love nature, then you love the complexity. But otherwise, it's a nuisance. And you know, somebody said they just want the you know, the riverside to be sterile and simple, and so it's a real problem trying to figure out how to seduce people into loving nature and loving the complexity, and learning one plant at a time. It's incremental. So.
Something else I'm hearing in all of these comments is the idea of the collective and the community. We've got to start thinking about our open space and our yards, our little patch of green as part of a whole ecosystem, and we don't often do that, and I think that's what Steve is pointing out.
Yeah, on that point, I think it's a great question you asked. And when I moved here from Indonesia, I was like shocked that, you know, I was away like 20 years. I came back and it was like there's plastic and pesticides all over Princeton. Like if there's a place that should not have either of those, it should be here. So I would really love to see these groups here, the Watershed in particular, Sustainable Princeton, really get on people about putting carcinogens on sports fields and on their front lawns. You know, dandelions should be a symbol of honor. Those are amazing. They're nutrient dense. They actually have something against cancer. The root that is being tested in clinical trials in Canada, that we are still in this town throwing these carcinogens. Canine lymphoma is off the rocks. It just skyrocketed because our, you know, animals are so touching this. So I think it's really critical, and I'd love to see more talk about that, because we should really be embarrassed if our lawns do not have dandelions. And that's when you see those big trucks with really that stuff they don't sell in Europe. You know, it's in tiny little vials if needed for a really dangerous plant. And here we have anybody buying at Home Depot. This should not be happening in Princeton.
Interesting point. Well, this young lady has a, yes, you have another comment?
Oh.
I think the lady who asked the question is leaving the room, but as I heard it, you're looking for a source of native plants.
No.
For your, that you could purchase for your home.
No, it's actually that I have a fairly sizable plot of land, and I'm on a 3-year. I'm removing natives. I'm on my 3rd year. So I pull garlic mustard 3 times a day. I pull things from my yards 3 times a day. But I see it all around, like my neighbor, you know, they all, it's going to fly over my fence, right? I mean, so I was just wondering more, you know, we talk a lot about the animal necklace, but the reality is most of the land is in private hands. And I was wondering about programs to mobilize communities of private homeowners. And I understand, you know, and we all have, you know, I have a lot of lawn. So, you know, we all wrestle with these issues. It was more about, is anyone working, I know there's things in the school, but if we, yeah, Sustainable Princeton probably is the one. So I'm going to follow up.
Thank you. She also
got to run because I would love to stay, but they're emailing me.
Thanks.
She said something wonderful. Fences don't stop pollen, don't stop seeds, don't stop. And we need to think about that. Fences are, that goes back to the collective, the fact that we are in community. You have a question there, Kim?
Tom?
Yeah.
Tom?
Yeah. To your point about the collective, this conversation isn't complete until we also include the conversation about housing, where we build, what we build. And while we are grateful that organizations like the Watershed show up at planning board meetings, it would be even better if everyone showed up at planning board meetings and discussed why these principles matter and that we encourage this Smart Growth Council to keep going on with its work about building here in town and developing density where we should be building density and then preserving, as we've just heard today. So I encourage you all to be engaged at the zoning board level, the planning board level, to help come out and be a voice for that.
That's great. Citizen involvement. What was the quote, Sheldon, that you used at the front end? No tool is more powerful or accessible than civic involvement at the local level. I think that's so that comes from the book that Sheldon was telling us about. That is just so powerful. Other questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just had a granular question. Clearly, the whole invasive species thing is trending. I sometimes wonder who's winning here, you know, especially in regard to lesser celandine. I was just wondering.
That's the one.
Oh, that's
something?
I'm just wondering what, once you've defeated the ones that are more vulnerable, I'm not sure celandine is, how long is that victory? Because, I mean, they got there to begin with, and they got there by overcoming our native plants, and I wonder if there's any thoughts or any thinking about how to tilt the balance more towards native plants once you've gotten them going.
Interesting. Steve, you have a comment?
Well, you have to pick your spots. And you have to be proactive. Like lesser celandine, a lot of people have given up on lesser celandine. But there are a lot of areas in Princeton that have not been invaded by it or are just starting to get invaded by it. And it's very easy to deal with. And I'm sorry, but we have to use herbicides in a very selective medicinal way. You know, not the industrial, you know, approach, but to use it, herbicides in a medicinal way to just hit the 2 or 3 plants that start popping up in your yard. And then you're free of it. You just do that one time a year, and then you're done with it. And there's a lot of areas in Princeton that we can save from this incredibly aggressive plant. And garlic mustard, somebody else mentioned garlic mustard. You can, you know, we've essentially pulled all of it at Herrontown Woods. And we've been doing that year after year, and it gets easier year after year. So I think you have to pick your spots, and you can win. But of course, obviously, if people go away, then those plants will take over. So you need to be persistent, and the benefits are tremendous if you do that.
Okay, vigilance is the password there. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to that. By the way, one of our volunteers at Mountain Lakes Preserve brought me some garlic mustard pesto that he made a couple weeks ago. And you are all invited to pull as much garlic mustard as you want and do the same because it was delicious. But in response to Nelson, I wanted to say that one of the reasons we're planting all these trees is that, and protecting the understory with deer exclosures and sometimes smaller fencing and so on, is because when the trees grow up and fill the gaps in the canopy, they will shade out things like Japanese stilt grass, which is just a vicious invasive. So yes, as Steve says, you have to persist, you have to keep at it for a lot of years maybe, but eventually nature will help you, nature will reassert itself. And you can see that in preserves that have an intact canopy and a good understory of native species.
Great answer. Other questions, other comments?
One thing that has not been mentioned, Tony Nellison, who's on the board of Princeton Future, he's in France right now, and he said that in the downtown of Princeton, there ought to be a park within a minute and a half of every residential unit in the town. And we are a very long way from being able to do that here. And one of the things that, I don't know how we deal with it, but there are a lot of parking lots in this town, in the downtown, and maybe we could come up with some idea of, okay, give us a tenth of your parking lot and to make a park, and we'd all be happier. Anybody have any ideas about how one could do that? What do you think, Diana?
Sophie?
Sounds hard to me, but there's a need for parks in the downtown.
Well, I think one of the big opportunities that we have is we talk at the Watershed a lot about green infrastructure, so using plants and soil to manage the polluted stormwater runoff. And as we all know, Princeton's a very historic town. A lot of it was built before there was stormwater management. So as sites are being redeveloped, we do have the opportunity to add in these islands of green that are going to have multi benefits of bringing green into communities and capturing stormwater, helping our flooding problem. So it might not be a park per se, but I think it's a really hopeful, exciting thing that we can be bringing native plants into our downtown core and also helping to manage our stormwater.
Planting a tree. Yes, sir.
Scott.
I'd also like to point out that particularly in Princeton, one of the reasons that we're limited is because on one side we have a big university, which is a lot of open space and parkland per se, and on the other side is cemetery, which is open space and green space as well. And those are not considered parks, but they preclude a park from being established there. It's not just parking lots.
Well, we can always look at, the architects say that parking lots are the land banks of the future. So there's hope. This young man has had his hand up. Can we give him the mic? Oh, I'm sorry. Well, there's a young man too. Let's start with this young man, and then we'll go to that young man.
Who's going?
You first.
Okay, we've talked quite a bit about the area behind Nassau Street, which is one large parking lot, and ripe for exactly what we're talking about here. It is unused for any human use. There's a lot of use for cars, and we have to learn how to cope with that. But there's a whole area there which is downtown, and which could be opened up both for some commercial use and some green use of the sort that we're talking about.
That's
and
they're
I
land
don't know whether
banks.
to say I'm looking forward to that, but I think it will come.
That's it. And this
Good for you for being persistent. Excuse me, it's we've been calling it the Princeton Muse Walk, and the idea of getting people to cooperate. I'm just sitting through a series of lectures by a guy from the Center for Religious Inquiry, Theological Inquiry, and he talks, the point of his last lecture was mutualism, and that nature really encourages cooperation at every molecular level, that you will see plants manufacturing nitrogen and things like that, that I never really thought about. But mutualism is a kind of an interesting new buzzword. I'd never really heard it before.
Talking about community. This young man in a hat needs a microphone.
The man in the hat.
Yeah, I've worn this hat way too many years by now. I think it's interesting to sort of bring up the topic of like having more green spaces within like a lot of downtown areas. And with the sustainability degree I'm sort of like pursuing, I've done like a lot of like, studying in terms of like types of city infrastructure, the types of green spaces we should be incorporating. And I think when you open that conversation up, you sort of have to talk about what type of green spaces do we need in certain downtown areas. This might be like going into like, planting certain trees and stuff like that, as well as different types of shrubs. But I think another emphasis that we also need to think about that might also help with like reconnecting, and as well as offer as like insect hotspots and as well as pollinator hotspots, would probably be different types of garden spaces that promote certain native plants, which can offer, as well as sort of like trying to think like the term, like a sanctuary for, native plants in the area, to make sure that like there are some still alive there that are not necessarily in an ecosystem that is currently being attacked by invasive species, making sure that we still have some sort of native plant population. And yeah, just sort of like, I think, we sort of like need to keep in mind the different types of green spaces that we have within downtown infrastructure, because it doesn't always will like flow properly, but sort of make sense, like so what you were saying, like mutualism, to make sure that all flows so the ecosystem services are still around, and as well as can further protect the local ecology. I thought that was sort of important to address.
Great, great. Other comments before we close? Yes, Wendy.
I just wanted to say in response to your question, Sheldon, and this is also very consistent with what Princeton Future wants to promote. So right now there are public sessions being held about the redevelopment of the seminary's property in Princeton. And the intention is to have some affordable housing there. But one of the other things I heard from the planners at the last meeting is that the seminary has a green space along Stockton Street, but it's always been behind a fence. And part of the plan now is to try to turn that into a green space available to the public. And that would be a very good thing. And there will be other opportunities to do things like that as our smart growth plans proceed. So I'm very hopeful about that.
Good thinking. We do have at least one architect here. It strikes me that there are plenty of public spaces that are like the one sort of in the front of the municipal building. There's a park. Nobody uses it as a park. We need architects to step forward and say, this place ought to become a really exciting place where people will come and want to sit. For some reason, nobody goes to sit there.
Earlier today, we were talking about another one of our board members' accomplishments, Rich Ryan, who does tap into Princeton and was late of US 1. He's written a very interesting book on urbanism, featuring the work of a guy named William White. And one of the great things that White talked about, and who was it that I was talking to this morning about? Yes, Wendy and I were talking about the fact that one of the wonderful things about Heinz Plaza is there are chairs to sit in, and the chairs are movable. And that's one of the things, the reason people don't use spaces is often they are not invited in some way. And chairs that can be moved about give you an invitation not only to walk, but to sit and enjoy.
Marv Reed always used to say, people like to sit.
Yes, we do.
And those chairs, I believe, do not get stolen. I'm not sure, but that's my belief. There was a fear that people would come and walk off with them.
This has been a wonderful morning, and I can't thank you all who came and spoke enough. So a big round of applause for everyone.
That's great.
That was great. And you know, one of the things I take away from this morning is I'm a real fan. I work with the Nakashima Foundation. George Nakashima was a famous architect and world-renowned woodworker, furniture maker. And he wrote a book called The Soul of a Tree. And one of the things I feel today, in today's discussion, really brings us together, realizing that souls of trees and souls of people are very, very important and are close together. So nature, as Steve talked about today, is part of who we are and when we are our best selves. So I thank you all for coming out on a Saturday morning, and we will continue this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
As always, you are such a faithful supporter.
What are you reading, Nelson?
Oh, it's Eve's thing. Yeah. I want to feel it somewhere.